venture into White History Month, we should probably define what white is.
Learning colours. Let's colour cars. Red.
I just spent the past few minutes thinking over how to reply to this. I mean, who is the great idiot here? Is it you who thinks that you have to explain colours to us? Or is it the people who follow you who listen to you explaining colours to them? You know, most kids learn to differentiate colours when they're around 2 to 3 years old.
When we look at anyone with light skin and features, we almost always assume that they're white.
And who is this we supposed to be? It is you, not we, and not me. I definitely not make assumptions about the person's character or anything else, merely on the basis of their color of skin.
But historically in the United States, it's been a bit more complicated than that.
Get on with it. Yes, get on with it.
White is a term that historically has functioned as a descriptor of the dominant class.
Holy fuck. Your understanding of history is so fucked, so fundamentally flawed, and so obsessed with just one group of people. It's fucking absurd. It's almost like some kind of Nazi who views history only in terms of where he can find, well, imaginatory Jewish involvement in some conspiracy that he builds up. Do you really think that some poor fuck who lived in some 19th century New York slum, cleaning shit in the sewers or whatever, at the end of the day went home and said, "Well, at least I'm white"? Yes, being white, that will make the rats go away, that will make the hunger go away, that will make the poverty go away, that will make the diseases go away, and that will put a fucking roof over my head. The color of my skin, as well as the color of your skin, doesn't provide any protection from the hardships of life.
In the early British colonies of North America, religious identity and racial identity often went hand in hand. During the 17th century, the terms Christian, white, English, and free were used interchangeably to refer to white people.
Wrong. Benjamin Franklin didn't want Germans to come to the United States because they thought they were naturally lower in intellect. He also didn't want Italians to come to the United States because he believed that Italians were naturally lazy. Guess what? Throughout most of history, white people hated other white people, and it had nothing to do with the color of skin. It had to do with culture, with language, with nationality, and various other concepts. There never was such a thing as unity amongst the various European nations. Never. Ever. Not even to this day, and certainly not on the basis of race.
It wasn't until the emancipation of slavery when the term white became more popular, as many freed slaves were also Christian. White became more of a legal classification as laws limiting the rights of freed slaves started to emerge. The United States of America has often been referred to as a melting pot in reference to its diverse history of immigration. Whiteness in the United States is like an exclusive club that only certain people were allowed into.
I hate it when people repeat themselves. Do you believe that your bullshit becomes the truth if you keep repeating it?
But when we look at the history of European immigration in the United States, we see that not everyone was allowed in the club. There were many reasons for this, but a big one was religious discrimination.
Get on with it!
Irish immigrants still sided with American slaveholders, even though at the time Ireland regarded slavery as a great evil.
Most Irish Americans came to the United States during the 1840s because of the Great Irish Famine in Ireland, and most of these Irish immigrants to the United States didn't side with slave owners, but ended up fighting in blue uniforms. Besides, what did you say about Ireland during that particular time?
Even though at the time Ireland regarded slavery as a great evil.
You are standing there and lecturing us on history, and you don't even know that Ireland wasn't a sovereign nation but a British territory during that time.
During a time when segregation and racial lines were drawn, European immigrants presented a complication. While they were from Europe, they weren't seen as white, and whiteness was tied to legal rights, specifically property and housing rights.
No shit, Sherlock. Ever read through Polish history? Ever heard of the three partitions of Poland? The almost 200-year-long attempt to eradicate Polish culture and language, which culminated in the enslavement of an entire people? Ever read through Hungarian history? Specifically Hungary under Austrian rule and the countless revolts that were crushed by Austrian and Russian troops? The history of Greece, Romania, and Bulgaria under the Ottomans? The history of the people of Catalonia? The history of Ireland? And of course, the history of the Jews of Europe. Do you really think that whiteness has some magical force of creating unity? And if not, which I hope, did you really think that the people of Europe simply left these resentments behind when they came to America? Did you know that shortly after the end of the American Civil War, a large group of Irish-American veterans invaded Canada in an attempt to inflict harm against the British? Just because people share the same color of skin, that does not mean that they are all united in hating some group of people with a different color of skin.
So it became important for European immigrants to pursue the label white and to be seen as American.
How the fuck does one pursue whiteness?
When we want to study the shift of European immigrants towards whiteness,
What the fuck?
When we want to study the shift of European immigrants towards whiteness,
Bim, grim, slim, bim, bim. Bim, grim, slim, bim, bim. Bim, grim, slim, bim, bim. Bim, grim.
examining the history of Chicago, Illinois is a great place to start.
Get on with it.
Eventually, European immigrants started to intermingle, and areas that were marked for one group soon became more intermixed. They often married across nationality, but within religious lines. As they intermixed, the distinct lines drawn between them became more blurred, and they simply became known as the American working class.
Oh no, they formed the super whites. Now at least we know what you mean with whiteness. It's when people of various different ethnic backgrounds start to intermarry and have children.
When slavery was abolished in 1865, African Americans migrated from the South to Chicago and settled in the neighborhoods of European immigrants. As African Americans entered the working class, racial tensions between them and European immigrants increased as they found themselves competing in housing and employment markets. While labor fields were generally diverse, integration of black workers came at a snail's pace. Workplaces tended to be fairly clannish as people only chose to work with members of their own ethnic group.
As is still the case today with most immigration groups, from the Turkish kebab store to the Persian restaurant to the Korean shop. If I were to ever emigrate to the United States, I would certainly love to hang around more with people who speak German and know how to make a good pork roast.
Trade unions attempted to bring people together, but there was often a job ceiling that prevented black workers from having higher paid crafts. As a result, black workers worked for much less pay. When white workers would go on strike, their employers would threaten to fire them and replace them with black laborers. This ensured that black workers worked for less, and also racial tensions increased against African Americans. In the race riot of 1919, Irish gangs incited violence against African Americans. Members of an Irish gang called Regan's Colts set fire to Polish and Lithuanian neighborhoods while wearing blackface. They did this hoping that these groups would attack African Americans in retaliation, but they didn't. So they raided an African American neighborhood called the Black Belt and murdered several people. The black community retaliated, and this resulted in a riot that lasted 4 days. White identity in Chicago can almost be defined by the exclusion of people of color.
So if you identify white people in Chicago by these historic events, how do you identify Germans, for example?
Numerous settlement houses were established in the 1880s and 90s, and their goal was to remedy poverty among working-class European immigrants. While settlement houses were celebrated for their diversity, they still followed Jim Crow laws.
Followed, as in past tense.
Get on with it!
It became clear to them that there was social and political power in black exclusion.
I wonder how empowering it must be to be racist for the average, well, Irish dock worker of the 1920s. State-enforced legal racism was indeed real back then, but it was not empowering for the average white person, and certainly not for the immigrant.
The Gads Hill Center even had a blackface minstrel show in 1915 starring Polish and Bohemian actors that got rave reviews in the press.
And how does this affect you personally, 101 years later?
In the second quarter of the 20th century,
Get on with it! Yes, get on with it!
housing discrimination still continues to this day.
No, you can't. You're deliberately making a false comparison. Discriminating minority groups from buying certain properties or renting certain properties has been illegal since 1968.
And though segregation ended legally in 1964, the redlining of districts keeps black and brown people in the same impoverished neighborhoods that they've been in historically.
That is not due to racism, but due to poverty, you cunt.
When you examine the history of European immigrants in the United States, it's not a history without oppression and abuse.
That is because every people in this world have a dark chapter in their history books.
But it is a history where assimilation towards whiteness and black exclusion set a foundation for European immigrants to build themselves up in ways that many groups were not able to.
But you are able to now.
And that's white history.
You know, if I were to say that black history is nothing more than a few people in a jungle banging rocks and sticks together, I would be wrong, but also the outrage would be a lot bigger.